I stopped wearing my grandmother's gold necklace to work about 6 months before everything fell apart. Nolan said it was too flashy. Said the way it sat in the hollow of my throat made men stare, and he didn't like men staring. I believed him the way you believe someone when you've slowly forgotten that your own instincts used to be reliable. That's the thing nobody warns you about. It doesn't happen all at once. You don't go from a normal relationship to a bad one overnight. You give up a necklace here, a friendship there, a weekend visit to your sister in Richmond that somehow always gets cancelled at the last minute because Nolan has a headache or a work emergency or just a feeling that you shouldn't go. And you accommodate, and you accommodate, and somewhere in all that accommodating, you stop recognizing yourself. I was a financial analyst at Aldridge Maritime Group in Baltimore. Had been for 3 years. The company handled cargo logistics and port operations along the mid-Atlantic coast. Legitimate, profitable, and run by a man whose family had been doing business in this city for 4 generations. Prentice Aldridge. If you lived in Baltimore long enough, you knew the name. If you worked for him, you knew to keep your head down, do your job well, and not ask too many questions about certain late-night shipments, or the kind of men who occasionally came in through the service entrance on the 3rd floor. I had learned to do all 3. What I hadn't planned on was learning that Prentice Aldridge noticed everything. Quietly, constantly. The way a man does when he's built an empire by reading people before they've had a chance to lie to him. The day that changed my life started the way most terrible days do. Ordinary. I was at my desk reconciling port fee accounts when my phone buzzed. "Who's the guy in the gray jacket you keep laughing with?" I looked up from my monitor. Nolan must have been watching the building entrance via the parking garage camera on his phone. He'd insisted on having access after saying he wanted to keep an eye on the car. The man in the gray jacket was Dennis, a dock worker who'd stopped by the office to drop off paperwork and who had said something funny about his dog. We'd talked for 45 seconds. "Coworker," I typed back. "He's dropping off documents." The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "You think I'm stupid, Laurel." I set the phone face down and pressed my palms flat against the desk until I could feel my heartbeat slowing. This had been happening more frequently. The accusations, the monitoring, the way he phrased things so that any denial I offered sounded like more evidence of guilt. 2 years. We'd been together 2 years, and I couldn't remember exactly when he had stopped trusting me. I couldn't remember when I had stopped trusting myself either. "You all right?" I looked up. Prentice was standing in the hallway just outside my office door, not leaning, not casual, just standing with that particular stillness he had, like a man who never needed to fill silence with noise. He was in a charcoal suit, no ties, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He'd been in back-to-back meetings since 7 that morning. "Fine," I said automatically, just reviewing the Chesapeake account. He didn't move. His eyes, dark, careful, the kind that made you feel like being seen, dropped to my phone and then back to my face. "It's past 6:30, he said. "Go home, Laurel." I almost said I was fine again. Instead, I just nodded and reached for my bag. That night, Nolan was waiting in our apartment with 3 empty beer bottles on the kitchen counter and a 4th in his hand. He'd been a real estate broker when we met. Smart, confident, the kind of handsome that makes you feel lucky when he chooses you. Then the market shifted. His firm downsized, and he was between opportunities, which had now stretched into 11 months. He was home a lot. He was on my phone's location app constantly. He had opinions about everything I wore, everywhere I went, every person I exchanged more than 3 sentences with. I set my bag down carefully. Read the room the way I'd taught myself to, the set of his shoulders, whether he'd eaten, the specific pitch of the silence. "Who's Dennis?" he said without looking at me. "A dock worker, I told you." "You were laughing." He said something funny. He turned around then, and I saw it in his face, that particular shine in his eyes that meant he'd been sitting with this for hours, building it into something much larger than 45 seconds in a hallway. "You're always laughing at work," he said. "Always staying late. Always finding reasons not to come home." "Nolan, I was reconciling accounts." "And your boss?" He took a step toward me. "What about Prentice Aldridge? You think I don't see how you look at him?" I took a breath. He's my employer. I look at him the way an employee looks at her employer. Don't do that. Don't use that voice with me like I'm overreacting. You are overreacting. The words came out before I could stop them. I watched his expression shift. Something passing across his face I hadn't seen before. Something with an edge I didn't recognize. He crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed my wrist hard enough that I gasped. Nolan. Who else? His grip tightened. Who else are you laughing with? Who else are you staying late for? No one. You're hurting me. His other hand came up and caught me across the face. The shock of it dropped me to the floor. I was sitting on the kitchen tile before I'd understood what had happened. My palm pressed to my cheek, the sting radiating outward. The whole apartment went absolutely silent. I could hear him breathing. Laurel, his voice had changed completely, hollow. God, I didn't. Get out. My voice came out from somewhere below the shock, somewhere steady and cold. Get out of this apartment right now. I'm sorry, I don't know what. Get out, Nolan. The second time I was screaming. He grabbed his keys. The door slammed, and I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, and my wrist already purpling in thought, for a long and disorienting moment, of everyone I should call. My sister Bet was in Richmond. My mom was in Phoenix. My closest friend from college. I hadn't spoken to her in 8 months because every time I tried to make plans, Nolan had a reason it was a bad idea. The walls of my own life had been drawn in without my noticing, and now that I needed them, there was almost no one left inside them. My phone was already in my hand. I scrolled past 911, not because I didn't have a reason to call, but because I wasn't ready for the bright lights and the form with checkboxes that would reduce tonight to a series of facts. I scrolled past Bet because I couldn't hear her say "I told you so" in the voice she'd use while also being terrified for me, and then I stopped. Prentice Aldridge. I'd had his personal cell for 2 years. Given without explanation, just, if something happens and you can't reach the main line, you call this number. I had never used it. I pressed call before I could talk myself out of it. He picked up on the second ring. Laurel. Not a question. Alert, immediate, like he'd been expecting the call, or like he never fully slept. What's wrong? Just hearing my name in his voice, the way he said it, like it meant something, broke the composure I'd been holding by my fingernails. Can you come get me? I whispered. I don't know who else to call. A pause brief then. Where are you? Home, my apartment. But Nolan, he might come back and I. Lock your door, he said, and I could hear movement in the background, keys, the controlled urgency of a man shifting into action. Deadbolt, chain, everything. I'm 15 minutes away. Stay on the phone. I locked the door. I sat back down on the floor. He talked to me the whole way there, not about anything in particular, just his voice, steady and unhurried, asking me small questions, what I'd eaten, whether the heat was on. He didn't ask what happened. He waited until he knocked on my door and I opened it, and he saw my face. The look that crossed his expression wasn't anger exactly. It was colder than anger. It was the look of a man who has decided something and will not be moved from it. Let's go, he said quietly. He took me to his house in Roland Park, a stone colonial with a security system I didn't fully understand, and a man named Burke who watched the front door without seeming to. Prentice showed me to a guest room on the 2nd floor, with windows that looked out over an old oak tree, and said his doctor would come by in the morning. Prentice, I said, Mr. Aldridge, you don't have to. I know I don't have to, he said it simply, not unkindly. Get some sleep. His doctor, a woman named Dr. Ferris, who arrived at 8 the next morning with a medical bag and a no-nonsense manner, confirmed what I already knew. Bruised wrist, soft tissue damage, nothing broken. She photographed everything with clinical efficiency and left me with ibuprofen, and a look that said she'd seen this before and it never got easier to witness. Prentice brought coffee while I was still sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. I had 17 texts from Nolan. They progressed from apology to anger to threat in the space of 4 hours. The last one read, I know you went to him. That proves everything I ever thought about you. I opened my banking app instead. I don't know why. Maybe I needed something concrete to focus on. Maybe some part of me already knew. My savings account held $340. 2 weeks ago, it had held just over $4,000. My emergency fund, accumulated paycheck by paycheck over the course of a year. I clicked through the transaction history, with my hands going numb. ATM withdrawals I hadn't made, transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, and deeper back, purchases on a credit card I didn't remember opening. I pulled up my credit report. It took me 4 tries to enter my information correctly because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. 2 credit cards opened in my name in the past 14 months, a personal loan for $12,000 through an online lender, active and current, a second loan for $6,500 60 days past due, total fraudulent debt, just over $20,000. I sat in that guest room, with Baltimore November light, coming through the old oak tree, and understood, with a clarity so sharp it felt like something physical, that Nolan hadn't just hit me last night. He had been dismantling me for over a year. When Prentice came back, I handed him my phone without a word and watched him scroll. His face did something controlled, and something underneath that control that made the room feel smaller. "We're going to the police," he said. "It's my word against his." "No." He set my phone down on the nightstand. "It's your word. 2 fraudulent loan applications with forged signatures, a credit card opened with your social security number, and 14 months of transaction records." "That's not a," he said. I said. "That's a paper trail." He paused. "Will you let me help you build the case?" "I want to be the one who builds it," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression, something that felt like recognition. "Okay," he said, "then I'll give you the resources, the attorney, whatever documentation support you need. But the work is yours." And that was how I spent the next 3 months. I filed the police report 5 days after leaving my apartment. Detective Huang at the Financial Crimes Unit was methodical and unhurried, walking me through every document with the patience of someone who had learned that victims move at their own pace. I gave her everything: bank records, the credit report, screenshots of Nolan's texts, Dr. Ferris's photographs. I moved out of the Roland Park house after 2 weeks and into a sublet studio in Hampton because I needed to know I could. Prentice didn't argue, though I saw the tightening of his jaw when I told him. He arranged for Burke to drive me there, help carry boxes, and then disappear without being asked to, which I appreciated more than I could say. The studio was small. The radiator knocked. I ate cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row. Then one morning I woke up and made eggs and toast and ate them at the window watching the street, and it felt like finding a handhold. The fraud investigator Prentice's attorney connected me with was named Glenn Purcell, a former IRS examiner who approached financial crime with the personal outrage of someone who took dishonesty as a direct insult. He reviewed my documentation with meticulous satisfaction. "This is thorough," he said, flipping through the timeline I'd built, cross-referencing every transaction against Nolan's known accounts, every application, every withdrawal, sourced and annotated. He looked up. "You have a talent for this kind of work." "I'm a financial analyst," I said. "This is just forensic bookkeeping." "The signatures are forged. I'll have the handwriting analysis commissioned, but I can already tell." He tapped one of the loan applications. "This isn't your signature." He was right. The analysis confirmed it 3 weeks later. The grand jury indicted Nolan 6 weeks after that. 3 counts of identity theft, 2 counts of fraud, 1 count of forgery. I signed the lease on a 1-bedroom in Federal Hill the same afternoon I got the call. The trial, when it came, was less dramatic than I'd feared. I sat in the witness box and answered questions precisely and without visible emotion. Because I'd been practicing with the DA's office, and because I had learned, somewhere in the past few months, that composure is a kind of weapon. Nolan's attorney implied I'd authorized the loans. I said clearly that I had not, and I pointed to the handwriting analysis, and I pointed to the documentation, and I let the evidence do what I'd built it to do. The jury was out for 3 hours, guilty on all counts. Nolan's face when the verdict was read was the face of a man who had genuinely never believed he would be caught. It told me more about the past 2 years than anything he'd ever actually said to me. I walked out of the Baltimore City courthouse into late March sunlight and stood on the steps for a long moment just breathing. Prentice was leaning against his car at the curb. He'd been there for all 3 hours, which I hadn't asked him to be. He straightened when he saw my face. "It's done," I said. He smiled, a rare thing, unhurried and genuine. "No," he said, "it's just starting." He was right about that, too. The 6 months after the trial were quieter and mine. I started running again. I'd run through all 4 years of college, and given it up because Nolan said it was a strange thing to do alone, and I'd believed him, the way I'd believed so many things. I rediscovered my grandmother's recipe box that I'd packed away because Nolan didn't like the smell of things cooking. I called Bet on Sundays and let her be relieved at me, and then laugh at me, and then be relieved again. I started therapy with a woman in Mount Vernon named Dr. Castillo, who had a gift for asking exactly the question I'd been avoiding. The fraudulent accounts were flagged and disputed. Most were removed from my credit report within 4 months. The $4,000 Nolan had drained from my savings was gone, but I rebuilt it. My paycheck, my account, mine. Prentice and I fell into something that didn't have a name yet. Coffee most mornings in his office before the building filled up. A habit that had started during the weeks I was working out of Aldridge Maritime on the legal case, and never quite stopped. We talked about things that had nothing to do with work. He asked about my runs, what I was cooking, whether I'd called Bet. I told him about therapy, and he listened without offering to fix it. One morning, about 3 months after the trial, I asked him why he called me Goldie. He'd started doing it gradually, so gradually I hadn't noticed the shift from Laurel to something softer. He glanced at the necklace I'd been wearing again since January, my grandmother's gold chain, back where it belonged, and said simply, "Because of that. The first week you worked here, you wore it every day. Then one day you didn't, and you never did again. I noticed." I stared at him. "You noticed that 3 years ago?" "I notice most things." A pause. His voice was quieter. I should have said something sooner, about a lot of things. "Prentice." "I'm not saying it to pressure you," he said quickly. "You're healing. Take all the time you need. I just want you to know that I've watched you build your life back these past several months, and I've never respected anyone more." It was the honest version of something he'd been not quite saying for weeks. I felt it settle in my chest like a warm hand. "I'm not done yet," I said, "but I'm close." I took a solo trip to Savannah in May. 4 days, a small hotel in the historic district, long walks along the river, bad watercolor sketching in Forsyth Park that I didn't care was bad. I ate dinner alone at restaurants with no particular timeline. I slept without waking up anxious. On the 3rd night, I sat on the hotel balcony and watched the lights on the Savannah River and felt something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten what it was called. Not just the absence of fear, actual contentment. The specific warmth of being somewhere you chose, with no one to accommodate, no mood to read, no version of yourself to shrink into. I texted Prentice a photo of the river. His reply came in under a minute, beautiful view. Then, after a beat, "Come back when you're ready." I went back to Baltimore 2 days later, straight from the airport to the Aldridge Maritime building, knocked on Prentice's office door. He looked up from his desk, and something in his face went very still. "Goldie," he said it carefully, gauging where I was. I closed the door behind me and sat in the chair across from his desk. "I need to tell you something." He set down his pen. "I spent 2 years making myself smaller because someone told me that was the appropriate size to be," I said, "and I spent the 6 months after that figuring out who I am when nobody's telling me." I met his eyes. I'm not confused about what I feel. I'm not grateful and mistaking it for something else. I know the difference now. I held his gaze. "I'm choosing you, Prentice. Not because you're safe, because you're who I want." He was around the desk before I finished the last sentence. He held my face in both hands and looked at me for a long moment. Really looked. The way he'd always looked, like he was reading something true. "Are you sure?" he asked. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. The kiss was unhurried and thorough, and felt like something we'd both been waiting long enough to stop rushing. When we came up for air, I was laughing, which surprised us both. "What?" he asked. "Nothing." I shook my head. "Just, this looks nothing like I thought my life would look right now." He tucked a strand of hair back from my face. How does it look? Better, I said, a lot better. I didn't anticipate what came next. Maybe I should have. 4 months later, on a Tuesday morning, my phone rang with an unknown number, a U.S. Marshals spokesperson. Nolan had been serving his sentence at a minimum security facility in Western Maryland and had walked away from a work release program the previous night. I sat at my desk for 30 seconds very still. Then I called Prentice. He answered on the first ring. I heard, he said, which meant Burke had already heard. I'm on my way to the office. Don't leave the building. The marshals arrived within the hour. Prentice sat beside me in the conference room, and I answered their questions, and I did not let my hands shake, even though every old nerve in me wanted to. He'll attempt contact, the deputy told us. Given his behavior during incarceration, the fixation, we take this seriously. I'm not hiding, I said. The deputy looked at me. I spent a year being afraid of him. I'm not doing it again. I kept my voice even. Tell me what precautions you need. I'll cooperate with all of it. But I'm not disappearing from my own life. Prentice said quietly beside me, We'll coordinate security at her home and here. My people will work with yours. The deputy nodded slowly. All right. Nolan called from a burner 3 days later. I was walking into the building, Burke 3 steps behind me, and I answered because I already knew. Laurel. His voice was thinner than I remembered. I just need to talk to you. Then turn yourself in and talk to your attorney, I said. That's the only conversation we'll be having. You destroyed everything, my record, You opened credit cards in my name. My voice was perfectly level. I was genuinely surprised by how level it was. You forged my signature on loan applications. You hit me. What happened to you is what happens when someone does those things and gets caught. Those are your consequences, Nolan, not mine. Silence. You're with him. The old jealousy stripped thin by a year of prison. You went straight to Aldridge. I called someone who showed up, I said. That's all that happened. What came after, what I chose, that's mine. You don't get an opinion about it anymore. I ended the call and handed my phone to Burke for tracing. The marshals found Nolan 3 days later at a motel outside Frederick. He didn't resist. The deputy told me afterward that he'd looked like a man who had exhausted himself on the way there. The escape added 4 years to his sentence. He would be a stranger by the time he was released, and I intended to be completely unreachable. The night after the marshals confirmed his recapture, Prentice made dinner at the Roland Park house. He cooked the way he did everything, with complete focus and no wasted motion. I sat on the kitchen counter and watched him and felt the tightness in my shoulders finally, genuinely release. After dinner, we sat in the back garden. Even though November had no business being sat in, he had a blanket, I had wine. The city hummed distantly beyond the garden walls. I have something for you, he said. He set a small box on the garden table, not a ring box, flatter, longer. I opened it. My grandmother's gold necklace lay against the velvet. Repaired, cleaned, the clasp replaced with a sturdier one. I stared at it for a long moment without speaking. I tracked down the pawn shop Nolan used, Prentice said carefully. It took a few weeks. I didn't mention it because I wasn't certain I'd find it. He paused. It's yours. It should have stayed yours. I couldn't speak for a full 30 seconds. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and produced a second box. He opened it without theater. A simple gold band with a single pearl at its center, not flashy, the kind of ring chosen because it meant something rather than because it announced something. I've watched you for 3 years, he said. I watched you give yourself away piece by piece to someone who didn't deserve a single piece of you. And I said nothing, because you weren't mine to protect, and because I knew enough to understand that protection isn't love when it isn't freely chosen. His jaw worked for a moment. I'm asking you to choose it. Choose me, not because of what I can provide or what I can keep away from you, but because I know who you are when nobody's watching. And I want to be the person who gets to keep seeing that. I looked at the necklace in one box and the ring in the other, and I thought about the woman who had sat on a kitchen floor, not knowing who to call. I thought about Glenn Purcell saying, "You have a talent for this," and Detective Huang nodding at my organized binders, and Dr. Castillo asking me the exact question I'd been avoiding. I thought about Savannah and the river, and the feeling of being whole, in the particular way that only comes from building something yourself. I thought about 15 minutes between a phone call and a knock at the door, and the voice that stayed on the line the whole way. "Yes," I said, "obviously yes, Prentice." He laughed, startled and genuine, and slid the ring onto my finger. I put the necklace on myself, and it settled into its old place at my throat, like it had never been anywhere else. "Goldie," he said, and it sounded like what it had always been. Not a nickname, not a joke, but something he had noticed long before I knew he was paying attention. A way of saying, "I see you. I have always seen you. I've been waiting for you to see it too." I leaned my head against his shoulder and looked up at the November sky over Roland Park, and thought about the specific arithmetic of what Nolan had tried to take. He'd taken my savings, he'd taken my credit, he'd taken my grandmother's necklace, my Sunday phone calls, my morning runs, my confidence in my own perception of events. He'd taken 2 years and tried to take more. What he hadn't counted on was that I was, at my core, a woman who tracked every number and kept every record. And that eventually, methodically, patiently, I would account for all of it.